Hey team, Neil from Alpine Endurance. This video is showing scientific literature on polarized training that we use here at Alpine Endurance. Polarized training is where we do the majority of our training at a low intensity, below our aerobic threshold, and then a small amount of training at a high intensity. And we avoid having every workout sort of meld into that middle intensity zone. Enjoy the video. Okay, team. So our first paper here was from Norwegian cross-country skiers, and they looked at all their training in the year that the athlete either won an Olympic gold medal or they won a world championship. There were both male and female athletes in this, and most interestingly is if we scroll down here, yeah, so we have 4 male and 7 female, either cross-country skiers or biathletes were included in the study. And we're just going to jump right to the results here. So time in training zone, 91% of all training was in the endurance or low intensity, and they're referring to a 5-zone model here. So zones 1 and 2 on a 5-zone model, which, as we just talked about, that would be on a 3-zone model, zone 1 below aerobic threshold. So 91% of all training was below aerobic threshold, and then just 9% was in either zone 3, 4, or 5 on a traditional 5-zone model. So only 9% as high intensity. And even more interestingly, down here is just how easy they're going the majority of the time here. So, well, we don't need to highlight it, but so zone 1 on a 5-zone model, 86% of the time they're in zone 1. Now, I'm the first to admit here that they averaged 770 hours of training in a year, which is absolutely massive. And so we'll get to that in a sec here, training volume. But for right now, gold medal, world champion cross-country skiers are doing 91% of their training under aerobic threshold. Alrighty, and this next study looked at the training logs for the Dutch speed skaters who had won an Olympic medal, and they looked at over 38 years of training logs, and they classified training into either 3 training zones, so 1, 2, or 3. Zone 1 below aerobic threshold, zone 2 between aerobic and anaerobic, and zone 3 above anaerobic. And their conclusions here was that these data indicate that in speed skating, there was a shift towards polarized training over the last 38 years. This shift seems to be the most important factor in the development of Olympic speed skaters. So polarized training being another term for 80-20, or doing a lot of training easy and then some training hard, and limiting that middle zone. And some really interesting specifics in this study, if we come down here to results. And so this was, unfortunately, just male athletes were looked at, and this was athletes in either a 1,500, a 5,000, and 10,000 meters. And so interestingly, there was no increase in training hours, meaning they trained the same amount of hours, and their times increased by an average of 18%, which on its own I think is quite high. And they go on here to say, expressed in the amount of increase in power that they would have needed to do to get that 18% was over a 57% increase in power. And it goes on to say here that half of that improvement can be explained by technological improvements, better skates, etc. But the other half, so a little under 30%, was through athletic improvement. And so if we look here at the distribution of zones, so as I said, total training hours did not go up, but there has been a very clear and a significant shift towards more training below aerobic threshold, less training above aerobic threshold. Okay, gang, so before we get into this study, those previous two papers that we talked about, looking at the cross-country skiers and looking at the speed skaters, all that's saying is, here's the best athletes in the world, and here's how they train. That's all it's saying. One thing is not proving the other. There may be a better way to train, but until it's proven otherwise, those are pretty compelling evidence. Anyways, so I'm highlighting this paper. There's large amounts of studies that have been done on polarized training versus threshold training. So polarized being either like zone 1 and zone 3 on a 3-zone model, and threshold training being more of that middle zone 2 training. There's been lots of studies, but I'm pulling this one up in particular because this was a crossover study, which was quite interesting. So what that means is that they didn't just separate candidates into either polarized training or threshold. All the subjects did both styles of training. So what they did here was training for 4 weeks, so getting them a little bit less fit. Then they did baseline testing, and then some of the group did polarized, some of the groups did threshold training for 6 weeks. They had testing, they did another training for 4 weeks, more testing, and then they switched positions. So whatever they had done in the first training, they did the other style of training in the last 6 weeks, and then again a testing week. And then they gave results for polarized training versus threshold. And so those were cumulative between all the participants did both styles of training. And before we get into the specifics here, just highlight a few things of note here. So a polarized training distribution results in greater systemic adaptation over 6 weeks in already trained cyclists. Markers of muscle metabolic adaptation are largely unchanged, but metabolomics markers suggest a different cellular metabolic stress that requires further investigation. So basically, stuff going on in the muscles. Basically, what they're saying here is polarized training was better, but they can't pinpoint why it was better. And this is a common thing in a lot of studies. Polarized results in better results, but they don't really know specifically why. So let's scroll down here to some more specific findings from this crossover study. And so they have it in graphical form here, but if you look at the chart here, let's just zoom this in a little bit. So POL is the polarized results, and THR is the threshold results. So let's just go down that list here. So they did a 40-kilometer time trial, and the MPO, the mean power output in watts. So basically, how much watts could they hold for that 40K TT? So the polarized training group had an 8% increase. The threshold group had a 4% increase in watts they held over a 40K TT. LTW, lactate threshold. So the watts you can hold at lactate threshold. So lactate threshold being another way of saying aerobic threshold, which is what you guys test for in our training plans. So that's quite a significant marker here. So that's basically saying what watts can you hold for a really sustainable long time. And the polarized group had a 9% increase, and the threshold group had a 2% increase. The LTP, lactate turnpoint, another confusing term for anaerobic threshold. So your upper threshold. And again, this is in what watts could you push on the pedals at that threshold. Polarized group, 6% increase, and threshold group, 4% increase. Peak power output, polarized group, 8% increase. Peak power output, threshold group, 3% increase. And then this is an absolutely massive difference here. 95% exercise capacity. So at 95% of their VO2 max, how long could they hold that for? So basically time to exhaustion. So 85% increase in the polarized training, 37% increase in the threshold training. So let's apply these stats to, let's say, an enduro mountain bike racer. So they have increased their power at aerobic threshold. So this means you can climb up to your next stage in that sustainable fat burning zone and not be reducing your glycogen as much. And then this 95% time to exhaustion, that would be representative of during your race stage, how long you can maintain a really hard effort. That would be increased as well. Both of these are quite significant findings in my mind. Thanks for your attention, everyone. So in a summary, the reason Alpine Endurance follows a polarized training model for both our mountain biking and ski touring training plans is because that's how the majority of the world's elite endurance athletes train. It's how, or it's what is widely supported in the scientific literature, not exclusively, but widely supported. And thirdly, it's how I've had quite significant personal success in training as well. So if you're looking to start training like this, check out our training plans on alpineendurance.ca. And our next video is going to do a deep dive into training volume. So how much workload is optimal? Thanks, team.